Hello, in this video we'll talk about exceptions. Exceptions occur when something wrong happens in the code. When something wrong happens in the code, the program stops immediately. So for example, here we have number 1 and number 2, and what we are trying to do is we are dividing 4 by 0. So this will result in an error. So let's run this code. So when we run this code, we get a 0 division error. So this is an exception thrown by the code. Now the important point to note is that we don't get to see this line. We don't get to see exiting, right? Because once an exception is thrown from this line, the next line does not execute. Exception can be reached for multiple reasons. For example, import error, index error, syntax error, type error, value error. Let's see some of them. So here I have a list. I'm trying to access an index 4 which does not exist. So there's no value at 4. So it throws a index error. Let me comment this. I need to comment because otherwise piece of code which I want to execute will not get the control. What I've done is I've induced a syntax error. This list, this has curly braces here. It's not appropriate syntax for list. So this will throw a syntax error, invalid syntax. Again, an exception. Next, what I'll do is I will induce a value error. What I'm doing is I'm converting a string to integer. Right. So this also gives a value error because you can't pass a string value. In the sense, a non-numeric string cannot be passed. You can obviously pass a string value. You can't pass a non-numeric string to be converted to an integer. Doing so will cause a value error. Let me comment this. What I've done next is I have defined a function where I intend to take two numbers and add them. But what I've done is instead of passing numbers, I am passing strings. Right now, this throws a value error because you can't convert a string to a non-numeric string to a number, and it throws a value error, as we see it here. Right now, to handle exceptions, what we do is we use a try except statement. So you write all your code, right? All the code, and the exceptions you catch here, right after the code. So what it means is that any exception here will be caught here. So for example, here I have induced a 0 division error, so I will get to see this 0 division error line, because once the exception happens here, the control jumps to the 0 division error which is caught, and this line is printed. And again, this statement will not print it. So let's run it. So what I should have done is this 0, and because it was 4, there was no error, so it was all the happy flow, and this statement will not be printed. Now when I've actually made it 0, this is going to give a 0 division error, and the statement is not printed. A try statement can have multiple except blocks, so you can catch multiple exceptions, right? For example, let me run this code here, and because we are adding a string and a number, right, which is throwing a value error, it is being caught here. So there could be multiple other pieces of code which are throwing exceptions, so we can catch each of those exceptions using except here. When you don't put any specific exception and you put except, all the errors are caught here. So when I run this, this error occurred will happen. Right? This has been printed. And sometimes what you want is that when an exception happens, but you still want some code or block to be executed. There is generally some cleaning code. So that is done by using finally. So what we have done here is, we have induce a 0 division error, so we'll get this exception divided by error, but we will also finally get this line. This will be always executed, right? So step 1, exception we get the exception divided by 0, and this will be always executed. Let's say if there was no exception, right, you will still see this line. This will be always executed. Because there was no exception, this line was not printed. Right, and the code in finally statement will always run even if there is an exception in the above line. So for example, here we have a zero division error. In the exception, we are printing unknown data. Now this, because it's unknown data, it will again trigger an exception. But still this finally block will get executed. Right. So this will always be executed, has happened, and we get the zero division error and also a message that another exception occurred. But the key important point is that the finally block, even when there is an exception in the block which catches exception, it still executes. And one can raise exceptions in our code using raise statement. So raise value error, right? And it is going to raise the exception. You can also pass parameters to it, so that the code which catches it actually gets a more descriptive message. So for example, now here, if there is an except block and you put a raise, then whatever exception was there, it re-raises it, right? So this is a divide by 0 exception, right? What it does is the divide by 0 exception, because it's part of the except block, it will be re-raised again. You need not raise that specific exception. Whatever exception was caught will be raised again. Right, this error occurred, and this is the division by 0. To see this in a much better way, what I've done is, you have another function where you call my function. Now my function, what it does is there is a zero division error which is raised in the exception block, and because it is raised in the exception block, it will be raised as a zero division error, which will be caught here. So let's run this. So what we see here is we have printed an exception of type zero division occurred, arguments, all those things, and we have printed the message, right? And we have raised that exception. Once we have raised the exception, the control comes here and it is printed. So the key point, don't worry about all this template message. What we are trying to drive, the important point is this raise. Raise raises the exception. When it's in an exception block, it re-raises whatever exception was caught. So this is all in a nutshell about exceptions. So exceptions help you to catch errors in the code. And we'll see more about exceptions in later videos. Let's in the next video we'll see more about files. Thank you.